The parsha begins, V'yetze Yaakov Beersheva. Yaakov leaves Beersheva, V'yelech Chorono, and he's going to Choron. Just what's the backdrop on this? Yaakov had taken the brachos of the birthright, and he had presented himself as Esav, his brother, and Esav saw this, that he stole the birthright. He stole the blessings. And only Rivka knew through divine communication that Esav is plotting to kill Yaakov. She summons Yaakov and she says to him, you must flee for your life. You should go to the community of my brother Lavan, and you will take a wife from there. And that will be a safe haven for you. She speaks to Yitzchak, her husband, and Yitzchak's not aware of the evil of Esav. And she says to her husband, Yitzchak, that I'm disgusted with these women from Canaan, the Hittite women. They're all idolaters. And if Yaakov should take such a wife, my life is not worth living. So Yitzchak says to Yaakov, I suggest you go to your uncle's home, the brother of your mother, and take one of his daughters as your wife. So Yitzchak went to Choron for a double reason. Firstly, to be in a safe haven, not to be killed by Esav. Secondly, to find the future matriarch of Klal Yisrael. That's where he had his wives. He married his wives, Rachel and Leah, the concubines, and that's where his children were born. 11 of his children, males, were born in Choron. Binyamin was born in Bethlehem. Excuse me. If the Torah wants to tell us that Yaakov was going to the house of Lavan, as we said, as he was instructed by his father and mother, and we know he's in Beersheba, what does Torah have to tell us? Yaakov left Beersheba to go to Choron. If we know his location, telling us where he's leaving from seemingly has no value. What do we gain from that? If a person's in New York City, and we know he's in New York City, and he's going to Washington, do you say he's leaving New York to go to Washington? We are aware that he's in New York. If we're aware Yaakov is in the location where his parents are, which is Beersheba, the question is, where is he going? He's going to Choron. You don't have to tell me he's leaving Beersheba to go to Choron, but yet the Torah shares this with us, that Yaakov left Beersheba. What is the takeaway on knowing that point? So Rashi cites the Chazal that when a tzaddik lives in the community, he's its beauty, he's its splendor, he's its radiance. His being there, the community is a different community. When he leaves the community, although in the physical sense it's the same community, but in terms of its innate value in God's eyes, it's not the same community. Yaakov is leaving Beersheba. By telling us that fact, when he leaves, Beersheba is being left behind. It's been depleted, spiritually depleted. It's spiritually diminished. But what would you think? His parents remain behind. His father is the patriarch of Klal Yisrael. His mother's the matriarch. So if Yitzchak and Rivka are there, his leaving should literally not have any effect. The location is a beacon of Kedusha, of holiness, due to his parents, one being the patriarch and the matriarch. Yet Torah says no. When Yaakov leaves Beersheba, despite the fact that his parents are behind, and each one has that special spiritual distinction, Beersheba is not the same Beersheba. It's another Beersheba. It's been depleted. It's been diminished. That's what it is. We find that when Avram bought the Marsa Machpelah from Ephron, and he paid an enormous amount of money, and he bought, and the Torah is very specific in what he bought. He bought the cave, he bought the field, he bought the trees. All aspects of that acquisition are quantified in that statement. And the Torah tells us when he gave the money to Ephron, counted out very enormous amount of silver coins, which were enormous weight. It says, Vayokam HaSodeh. The field was elevated. Va'ma'oro. Va'etzim. And all that was contained in the field was elevated. The word Vayokam could either mean it was established, it was transferred, or no. Literally, it means it was elevated. So Rashi cites the Midrash over there. It's like something that leaves the domain of a commoner and goes into the domain of royalty. When it left Ephron's domain, it left the domain of a commoner, and it was elevated because now it's the owner is royalty. What does it mean? It's royalty. Is it the way the world perceives it, or the way God perceives it? That the ownership to now, it's associated with Avram Avinu being the Nasi Elokim, being the patriarch who introduced God to humanity, monotheism, humanity, being the founding father of the Jewish people, being the father of Yitzhak, the future patriarch, being the father of the future matriarch, Rivka. It entered into his domain. Being in his domain, it takes on a whole different degree of significance, of value. It's Vayokam. It's elevated. We have no idea what that means. We can't fathom what that means. Being in Avram's domain. Could we fathom what the Holy of Holies was in terms of its innate value? It was the location that was appropriate for the Shekhinah, for the divine presence to dwell there. Although you can have pictures, we only relate to the physical location. But evidently, there's something innate in that location which has the capacity to contain the divine presence. The transfer of ownership to Avram's domain, it's taken on a different dimension of value. We read, in last week's reading, we had read that Yitzchak was confronted with a dilemma. He's in Canaan, and there's a famine. And he wants to leave Canaan to go to Egypt as his father went to Egypt. God comes to him and says, don't leave the land. Whatever you need will be here. And this was in the area of the Pelishtim, the Philistines. And although it was a famine year, the Torah tells us he planted that year, the planting, and the yield was Mea She'arim. There was 100 fold yield, despite the fact that it was a famine year. It's unheard of. In a regular year, you don't have such a yield. Maybe you have twice, 3 times. The word bumper crop is an understatement in terms of what he reaped here. 100-fold of what a normal year, and there's a famine. What does Yitzhak do with this crop? He sells it for an enormous amount of money, buys flocks and herds and slaves, accumulates wealth, tremendous wealth. And the Torah goes out of its way to say he became so wealthy, agodol mi'od, he became very great. What's very? He became wealthy. What's the very wealthy? See, very, what's godol mi'od? So Rashi cites the Midrash that the people in that area would say, we prefer the dung of the donkeys of Yitzchak than the gold of Avimelech, who's the king, the Philistine king. Why? Because if you take the dung of Yitzchak's donkeys and you fertilize the field, you know what grows out of that field? Gold. You take Avimelech's gold and you put it into the field. What grows out of the field is dung. What do you mean? But gold is gold and dung is dung. No. This is the dung of Yitzchak's fields. Yitzchak's donkeys. Yitzchak's donkeys aren't ordinary donkeys. Although in the physical sense, it's a donkey. A donkey is a donkey. But because it's the part of the portfolio of Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is the location of the divine presence, anything that's associated with Yitzchak is the ultimate blessing because Yitzchak is connected to the source of all blessing. Therefore, even the dung produces gold. Avimelech, which represents evil, and he's not attached to the source of blessing, his gold presents what? Dung. Avimelech couldn't handle it. He was like, it was a disgrace. Yitzchak's presence is a disgrace to him. What did he say to him? Could you please leave our community? And he forced him to leave the community. That's what happened. Yaakov being Beersheba, although his parents were there, Yitzchak and Rivka, both matriarch and patriarchs, being there, it's not the same. They used to say, the Chofetz Chaim, there's a famous story about the Chofetz Chaim. There was a story, Vilna, there's what we call a dibuk. A dibuk is a forlorn soul, which because of its errant behavior as a human being, the soul is not admitted into heaven. It doesn't go to Gehenna, doesn't go into Gan Eden. It just wanders. And it's tremendous pain for the neshama. The soul belongs either in heaven or in the location for purging. The soul was seen as such an outcast, God would not accept the invitation. So when a soul is in that situation, that soul is called a demon. It looks for an entry point into a human being, because when it's a human being, it functions within that person. So what happened? There was a 10-year-old girl in Vilna that this forlorn soul went into the body of this girl. And when a dibuk takes over, this forlorn soul took over the body of this girl. Immediately, she started to behave in a way which was frightening. She was no longer herself. The soul took over her whole existence. And the vilest language came out of her. Vulgar, vulgarities, which, what they used to say, a drunken sailor doesn't say those words. That's what was coming out of this girl. And it was not, the voice was another voice. And somehow they had to extract the soul from this girl. So what did they do? They took this little girl, 10-year-old girl, to the Chofetz Chaim. That because of the dimension of holiness of the Chofetz Chaim and this dimension of influence in the spiritual world, he'd be able to somehow extract the soul from this body, that this girl should retain her function and her normalcy. How do we know this story? Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zecher Tzaddik Levrocha, Hashem Yinokem Damo, was killed by the Nazis. He was the closest student of the Chofetz Chaim, and he had a kollel. It was called Kollel Kochim. The Chofetz Chaim himself was a Kohen, and because he believed that the coming Mashiach is imminent, he gathered the most advanced Torah scholars that they should study the section of the Talmud Kochim, which relates to sacrifices. Because what's going to be if the Beis Hamikdash is built, the temple's built, and people are totally ignorant. They know nothing about sacrifices. So he wanted to create an elite body of Talmidei Chachomim, that they should be the experts, that they'll advise the Kohanim when the temple will be built exactly how to officiate. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was part of this kollel. So what happened? They bring this girl into the Chofetz Chaim, and the Chofetz Chaim says to this child with the dibuk, with this forlorn soul in the child, says to the soul, who are you? Firstly, until the child was brought, there was, as I said, the words, the language was literally, you'd cringe And not only that, the soul being a soul, it knows everything about everybody. It started to divulge certain things about people's lives. People fled. They were afraid to stay within its proximity because people were ashamed. Because what we do behind closed doors, nobody knows. But this soul, being a soul, knew, so people fled from it. The Dibik, this child is brought into the Chavetz Chaim. The moment it comes before the Chavetz Chaim, dead silence. Not a word out of this child. And the Chavetz Chaim says to this poor lost soul, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? The soul doesn't answer. And it says to three, who are you? And finally, the soul divulges who he is. Tells the story, what happened, and how he went off the Jewish path, how he married in Africa women who were not Jewish. He had children from them, and how life came to a sudden end. And the Chavetz Chaim asks him, did you do tshuva before you passed away? This was a yeshiva bacher originally, yeshiva student. He says, I was going down a river in the Congo on the boat, and the boat gave a jolt. I fell off over the side, and before I had a chance to do tshuva, I drowned. If I couldn't do tshuva, this is what this is what this four-law son says to Chavetz Chaim. He says, I order you, you must leave the body of this girl. He's not leaving. So the students who were there, including Rav Chanan Wassman, says, what did they say about the Chavetz Chaim in heaven? Who is the Chavetz Chaim? So he says that the level of diligence and commitment to study of Torah is at a level of the Tanoim, of the Tanoic period. That's how committed he is to study Torah. Doesn't waste a moment, fully invested. This is what this four-law son is saying about the Chavetz Chaim. And he's considered holy of holies. And he says to the soul, if you leave the body of this girl, our kollel will study Mishnayos, which is a tremendous merit for the soul. And not only that, we will say Kaddish for a year. So your soul should be rehabilitated. And only after he gave him that guarantee did this four-law son leave the body of this girl. Rabbi Chanan Wassman, every Purim, when the students would gather in his home, he would tell over the story of the Dibik. Exactly how Chavetz Chaim extracted the soul from this girl. Who was the Chavetz Chaim? So he used to say, there's an earthly map and there's a heavenly map. If you look at a map of Europe in the 1800s, early part of 20th century, you'd look for Paris. You saw a large black circle, and in bold letters, it would say Paris. You want to find Berlin? Same thing. Bold letters, Berlin. London, London. If you want to look for Radin, which was the Chavetz Chaim's community, which was a tiny village where the streets weren't even paved, you'd have to get a magnifying glass to locate it on the map. That's how inconsequential Radin was to the world. However, Hashem has another map. It's called the heavenly map. God looks at the map. Radin covers 99% of the map. All these other locations, barely noticeable. They have no value. That's Radin. Why? But it's a little infinitesimal, not noticeable location. If the Chavetz Chaim lives there, it's a whole different dimensional value. It's unlimited value. And what happens when the Chofetz Chaim dies, passes away? It reverts back to that little town, which no longer has any value. It's like Yaakov leaving Beersheba. When he leaves, when he's there, he's its splendor, he's its radiance, he's its glory. He leaves, whatever he represented is no longer there. When the Chofetz Chaim passed away, all the radiance, glory, and whatever that was is no longer there. So the Chofetz Chaim passed away in 1933. The Chazon Ish, Rav Avram Shaya Karelitz, lived in Vilna at the time. When the Chofetz Chaim passed away, soon afterwards, 1934, the Chazon Ish left Europe and went to Palestine. Why? Because he held that as long as the Chofetz Chaim lived in Europe, lived where he lived, that whole area of Europe had the same status as Eretz Yisrael. Because of the Chofetz Chaim's innate spiritual value, God saw that Europe as a special location. The moment he passed away, it's like Yaakov leaving Beersheba. Its splendor, its glory, its radiance is no longer there. So where does the Chazon Ish go? He leaves, goes to Palestine. Just to give you an inkling and understanding of the way the Chazon Ish valued the presence and the existence of the Chofetz Chaim in his lifetime. What do you think the Chofetz Chaim's bracha? If the Chofetz Chaim ever gave a blessing, the blessing was always fulfilled. Because he himself is the source of all blessing. Because his essence is holy and pure. And God sees him as another dimensional person. Although he looked like any other human being, he happened to have a beard. He didn't even dress in rabbinic garb. Doesn't make a difference. Leaving Beersheba, Beersheba is not the same any longer. It's interesting. Yaakov, we read the story. He arrives finally in Choron. And he meets his future wife, Rachel Imenu. She was the primary matriarch. And he was able to see her soul, that she was his soulmate. She's referred to in Chazal as the Akeres Habayis. She's the primary matriarch. Even the sons of Leah recognize her as the primary matriarch. And immediately he meets his future father-in-law, and his father-in-law says to him, "What do you give me for working for you, for my daughter? How many years do you give me?" He says, "I will shepherd your sheep, take care of your flocks for 7 years." And working for Lavan was not an easy employer. It was literally slave labor. Literally, you were like on a chain gang, smashing boulders in the burning sun and freezing at nighttime. As later, Yaakov describes what he went through to his wives, which they weren't even fully aware what he had to tolerate and endure. And he worked 7 hard years for Rachel Imenu. And the Torah tells us, Hoya be'enov kiyom hachodim, that even though it was 7 years, it was like a few days. Time passed very quickly. It passed quickly. Kiyom hachodim, it's like a few days. So there's a question which is asked. I mean, if you want something, if Yaakov understands that Rachel Imenu is the future matriarch of the Jewish people, and by marrying her, he will meet the objective of creation to establish a Jewish people. I mean, if that's the case, it's like time's forever. Time passes, you can't wait till that moment comes. So if that's the case, how does the Torah tell us that the 7 years that he worked was Kiyom HaChodim, was like a few days, equivalent of a few days? How do we understand it? Now, if you have a piece of real estate, which is worth $1 billion, and the seller is hard pressed for cash, and he's willing to sell for $1 million, and you don't have $1 million. But to be able to get that money, You have to work day and night for a year, and it's available for a year to close the deal. The man doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, and his life that year, it's like he's working 100 years. But for $1 million, he gets $1 billion purchase. And yes, the person's, and then he closes the deal. They transfer him the $1 billion property for $1 million. They say, you really worked hard for this. I worked hard for this. This, what I gave is a pittance. You know what it means to make a profit, $1 million, get back $1 billion? It's unheard of. How do you evaluate time is worthwhile or not? It depends what the return is. Yaakov understood Rachel is the woman, through her, he's going to meet the objective of creation till the end of time. He is the patriarch who will father the Jewish people. They will receive the Torah at Sinai. She is the woman. What is the value of that woman? 7 years. But it's hard labor. It's meaningless. It's a pittance. I'm giving a pittance. Well, look what I'm getting in return. I am the patriarch who will father Jewish people because I have the appropriate matriarch to be able to have the tribes of Israel born from her. This is the Yom HaChodim. It was like a few days. I mean, what he paid for it was nothing in terms of its innate value. Moshe Rabbeinu presents to the Jewish people before he passes away. He says, I'm presenting before you life and death. Life and death. You have an inferno on one side and you have paradise on the other. He says, I'm presenting you life and death. Ubachartu b'chaim. I encourage you to choose life. Does anybody need encouragement? If you see one is death and one is life, does that person have to be encouraged to choose life? Why is it ubachartu b'chaim? So the Midrash explains it with an allegory, with a mashal. This person's traveling on a road and he comes to a crossroads. And there's an aged person sitting at the crossroads, and the two roads, one to the right, one to the left. The one to the right, as far as the eye could see, has potholes, pocked, snakes, scorpions. You can't imagine what you have to go through to travel that road to the right. You go look to the left, paved beautifully, shrubbery, fountains, wells, springs. So of course, based on what he sees, his evaluation, he's going to the left. So the wise old man says to him, I know exactly what's going through your mind. You're taking the road to the left, not the right. Because the right looks disastrous and you don't want to go there. But I'm advising you to take the right road, not the left road. Why? Because I understand as far as your eye could see, you only see difficulty and complications and challenges. But after 3-day travel, you're going to see things that you can't fathom. The beauty and the value and the benefit of that. It's worthwhile traveling the 3 days to come upon the ultimate. It pays. You travel the left road, as much as it looks attractive, after 3 days travel, you're going to be confronted with disaster that you can't fathom the level of pain and suffering you can experience. Never to be able to extricate yourself from that. And therefore, I advise you, take the right road. As they say in English, life's not a bowl of cherries. To observe the Torah, many challenges, difficulties. Sometimes it's like pushing a boulder up a mountain. But if you do it right, you merit what we call siyata d'shmaya, divine assistance. And if you succeed, what do you merit? You merit eternity. Now, what's the lifespan of a human being? David Mel says 70 years is the natural lifespan of a human being. 80 years, that means that's an extended lifespan. If you invest that 70 years appropriately and responsibly, what is the end result? Forever at the most special, unfathomable level of goodness. So what's 70 years work versus forever? It's a 3-day trek. It's like traveling for 3 days. That's what it is. Therefore, I encourage you, b'charta b'chayim, take the right road. But what about the challenges? What about the difficulties? What about all the questions? All the things that we're overwhelmed with? You want to know something? In terms of the payout, which you can't even fathom how special that payout is, it's worth everything in the world. Because all it is, it's like traveling for 3 days to ultimately achieve the ultimate. The other way, it's disastrous, catastrophic at a level that you can't even relate to. It's the same thing. Yaakov experiencing Lavan. 7 years, hard work. But what do we have at the end of the day? I have Rachel Imenu. Rachel Mevakal Boneo. When the Jews go into exile, she's buried in Beis Lechem, and she cries to God for her children. And what does Hashem say? Kol nishma b'rama nishma, v'shava boneh l'gulam. Her children will return to the borders. They're coming back. Mashiach is coming. That's what Rachel Imenu is. So what's her value? Her value is the world will achieve level of perfection. Is it worth everything in the world to acquire that kind of wife, to work for that kind of wife? What happens after 7 years? He's duped. Under the chuppah, Lavan being the charlatan, there's no words to describe how dishonest this man was. He switches Rachel for Leah under the chuppah. Comes the morning, all of a sudden he's shocked. He sees this is Leah, it is not Rachel. So Lavan says, in our community, we never marry off the younger sister before the older sister. And since Rachel's younger than Leah, therefore, we put Leah under the chuppah. Unabashedly, no shame. He's a shameless person, Lavan. He says, if you work for me another 7 years, you can have Rachel. Yaakov works another 7 hard years for the hand of Rachel, but he marries her immediately, 7 days later. You'd say, after being duped to such a degree, you know something? I'll give you the 7 years, but I'm going to give you 7 years which are half-baked. I'm not going to give you all I have. The Torah tells us no. The 7 years that he worked for Rachel were no less dedicated than the first 7 years that he worked for Rachel. But how do you do it? Because again, even working 14 years for Rachel, being the primary matriarch, it's worth everything in existence. Because only through her, I have the full understanding and all the components which are necessary. We talk about having a Jewish people, having a Klal Yisrael, achieving a setting for the receiving Torah at Sinai, to be able to achieve and address the objective of creation. Therefore, although he understood who Lavan was, didn't make a difference. As they say, you do what you have to do. And especially when you understand, it's not an exercise of futility, but rather, that's the initiative you have to take to bring about the ultimate. That's what you do. Therefore, again, it was Kiyom HaChodim. It was like what? It was like a few days. Small investment for the return. But that's quite a bit of money. But if you understand and appreciate the return, it's meaningless. Everything's meaningless. We read in Pirkei Avos, Schar B'Ha'el Maleko. When you do a mitzvah, there's no such thing. You're not rewarded in this world. Why? Because the innate value of a mitzvah is so unending. There's not enough time to live. There's not enough goodness in this world that you could be compensated even for one mitzvah. That's the innate value of a mitzvah. Could you imagine? You have a diamond. You put $1 in the charity box and you do the mitzvah of charity, positive commandment. The innate value of that is All the material in the world cannot compensate you for the innate value of doing that one mitzvah. You can only be compensated in the world to come, because the value of that mitzvah is unquantifiable. It's not finite. It's infinite. It's forever. So what is God going to give you? He'll give you 20 Rolls Royces, 16 mansions, 25 butlers. You'll own Texas and Alaska. What is he going to give you? He'll give you one of a kind of lifestyle. Oh, meaningless. Compared to that, it's meaningless. Schar ba'al v'aleko. So it's the exact same thing. So if a person is able to live and he appreciates what he has, there's an expression, certain people see the glass half empty. Other people see it half full. The question is, how do you see life? Everything in life is based on perspective. The way you internalize the reality of the value of life, that's the way you live your life. Happiness is rooted in being content. If I know what I'm doing has innate value, an eternal value, it's worth everything in the world. If you see a life, an exercise of futility, and you go nowhere, what happens? You get frustrated. I'm wasting my life. My life has no value. Understanding that existence within the perspective of Torah is only the means to an end. As it says in Pirkei Avos, the world is only a prosdor. It's only a pass-through. It's a corridor to the tracklin to arrive at the destination. That's what it is. So everything I have here, whatever I need, is only to facilitate the end result. So as long as you're succeeding, there's no greater level of contentment than that. Give you an example. Person works and there's no vacation he can't afford. He reaches his retirement. So what do? Wherever he goes, they sing his praises. He can afford every hotel. How many times could you go to a hotel? How many butlers could you have? How many times could you hear your praises being sung to you? But you have all that money in the bank. You could live forever. That's your security blanket. But you realize you're not living forever. You're not living forever. So what's it all about? Everything is limitation. We as Jews, we were giving a stake in eternity. We have a certain special component, spiritual component, that we supersede limitation. And if you hook into the system right, you can even internalize the value of that and understand every material value has no innate value. It's only to facilitate the spiritual. The Chofetz Chaim writes, we read in Pirkei Avos, Ezeru Osher Hasamech Bechelko. Who is the wealthy person? The one who's satisfied with his portion. What does it mean, Bechelko? Each of us have a mission in life. No two people have the identical mission. God provides the material that's needed to address and facilitate that mission. Who's the usher? Who's the wealthy one? As long as I have enough to facilitate my portion that was given to me at Sinai, which is my mission. If I'm able to succeed in my mission, I have it all. Everything else is called distraction. That's Ezo Osher. Who's the wealthy person? The one who's satisfied with his lot. Every person has their own lot. We have our own mission. But again, it's that. And if you feel that you're climbing that ladder the way you should be climbing the ladder, and every day you see is opportunity, and as you age, you realize you're coming closer to the destination, then what do? You're ecstatic. Once told over a story, I went to Rav Shach, Zeichet Tzaddik Livrocha, with somebody many years ago. Went there a number of times. Rav Shach, who was the leading Torah sage in the world at the time, says to this person who I'm with, he says, people, they celebrate birthdays. When you celebrate a birthday, person's 65 years old, he celebrates the birthday. And he feels, even if he lives till 80, what's he celebrating? that he has 15 years left to live, left to life. That's pretty depressing. Looking back, how did he spend his life? He partied. He went to the beach. He has a dog. He owns horses at the racetrack. Looking back, what's your life worth? So what he's celebrating? You got 5 years, 10 years to live. You know something, that's not something you celebrate. You got 100 years to live, that celebration. 5 years, 10 years, it's depressing. But he says, but if a birthday is looking back at all the milestones and all the successes of your life, there's a time to rejoice. Look what I've done with my life. My life has this value. Then you celebrate. You know, a person goes, you know, today, people, in terms of families, what do they have? 1 child, 3 dogs, and six housekeepers, a four car garage. That's what they have, and they always have a car in the by the mechanic being fixed. So now, what do you have to show for your life? What? Person has a family, and they're raised properly, with a tradition, with a perspective, and they have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And you take a picture of the family, the patriarch and matriarch of the family. They're surrounded with 150 grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And they all look refined. And they're all steeped in the tradition. That's something to celebrate. And the grandparents keep this picture on their wall in their room, and whenever they look at it, they glow. They radiate. That's what life's all about. You're showing something for your life. But if all you have, bare walls with ornaments and gold sconces on the wall, and you have antique dining room table that Louis XV sat at because you could afford it. What happens when you pass away? Where's that dining room table going? Is it going to a museum? Or your children are going to take it, if you have children, or you're going to give it away. That's it. And they'll put a plaque on it that you dined on that for so many years. What's it worth? It's worth nothing. So what is value? The tzaddik leaves the location. What's no longer here? The tzaddik, when he leaves, he knows exactly where he's going. He may feel he fell short of his potential, but he did pretty well in his lifetime. The other person, when he leaves, unfortunately, they're so removed from understanding what they should be. There was a story. There was a person many years ago. Some of the people on the Zoom knew him. His name was Jerry Hornbless. He was one of the students of Yad Avram. He was the state Supreme Court judge, New York State. And he would go to Sloan Kettering, and he would blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah for the patients. And this story goes back maybe 25 years. He goes to a room, and he would ask the people, it's Rosh Hashanah today, would you like I should blow the shofar for you? And it's a very solemn, holy day. He walks into a room of a man. Man is elderly person. He's dying of cancer, and he says, do you want I should blow the shofar? He says, I have no interest. He says, why? It's the day of judgment. It's the holiest day of the year, most solemn day of the year. It has special value. He says, I'm a Reformed Jew. I don't believe in it. It has no value to me. Could you please leave the room? He was like taken aback. He shared it with me. This man was so removed from Judaism, something which has such important value. It silences prosecution of Satan. On Rosh Hashanah, the man says, I'm a Reformed Jew. I don't believe in it. It has no value to me. Could you please leave? And if you don't leave, I'm going to call the security and they'll take you out of my room. Ever hear such a thing? This person, so where is he now? He's in Sloan Kettering, hooked up to whatever it may be, and who knows what his end is going to be. Will he ever leave that hospital? Will he not? It's irrelevant. And even if he leaves, where is he going back to? He's going back to the trough. back to the feeding stable. Where's it going back to? But if you understand what it is, Yaakov says, regardless of what I have to endure, 20 years of hard labor with this monster called Lavan, if I come out of it unscathed, and that's what he sent back to his brother Esav, after not seeing him for 36 years, Im Lavan garti tag mitzvah shamarti, I may have sojourned with Lavan, but I'm coming back unscathed. I observed those 613 mitzvos meticulously. And despite the environment, I'm coming back intact. So I'm even more advanced because the challenge was even greater. You know what kind of statement that is? It's a statement of victory beyond victory. You meet every challenge, inconceivable challenges, unfathomable challenges. Yaakov had that divine assistance, what we call the siyata d'shmaya, because God promised him, "I will watch over you." And even after everything's said and done, when he hears that Esav's coming against him with 400 men and maybe a battle of life and death, he's concerned. Why is he concerned? Because maybe somehow I fell short of where I should be. Maybe I'm not as perfect as God wants me to be. And that's the way a tzaddik thinks. Since the potential of every human being is unlimited, as long as you have life, maybe I could have done better. It's no Rav Sadia Gaon. Every day of his life, he would do tshuva, he would repent. Why? Because always the next day he realized that he was at a more advanced level. He always demanded of himself, why wasn't I there yesterday? There may be a claim against me. Since today I'm at a level beyond, why wasn't that more advanced level yesterday? That's where Rav Sadia Gaon lived his life. So every day he upgraded, and every day he did tshuva for not being there the day before, because he understood what's the value. Time's of the essence. Time is invaluable. Once you waste time, you can't recoup time. Anything in life is what is recoupable. Time is not recoupable at all. Every moment has infinite value. If a mitzvah is so unlimitedly valuable that you can't be rewarded, so if every moment you're able to invest it in something which is eternal, once you waste that moment, you can't regain it. So that person who's really spiritualized doesn't waste the moment. Invest it fully. Only because he has an appreciation of its value, therefore he utilizes as he should utilize it. Just then with a story with the Chofetz Chaim, there was a very wealthy Jew came to visit the Chofetz Chaim in Radin, and the Chofetz Chaim was a very wise man. Besides being holy and being knowledgeable in Torah, everything, he says to this rich man, he was an observant Jew, he says, in America, they say, he came from the United States to see the Chofetz Chaim. He says, in the United States, they say that time is money. Time is money. He says, but they got it backwards. Money is time. If you take your time and you have to earn money because you have no choice but to earn the money, you're taking time which is invaluable and you're utilizing it for money. But if you have money and you're able to cover your needs as a human being and all your amenities, now you have all the time available to do mitzvahs. Therefore, that time can be invested in the infinite. So it's the opposite. It's not time is money, but having money is time. Again, it's all based on perspective and belief and understanding what the reality of life is. And because Yaakov understood that his value and his objective was to father the Jewish people, and that could only be done through the appropriate matriarch, which is Rachel Imenu. Therefore, regardless of the 14 years that he worked, although he was cheated and duped and fooled and connived, it was okay. Because at the end of the day, he was the victor, he was the winner, because he had the matriarch through who he was able to establish the people who the world was created for, to address the objective of creation, which is the receiving of Torah at Sinai.